Hello, today I would like to share with you music for piano by Lili Boulanger, d'un Vieux Jardin and d'un Jardin Clair. It's two gardens, I think inner gardens. Oh yes, they are the beautiful gardens of Gargenville where she grew up, Jardin frais, and also the ones sumptuous at the Villa Medici in Rome, where after winning in 1913 the first woman to be Rome Prize of Composition, which is organized by the French Academy of Fine Arts, she resided there briefly, too briefly. Everything is too briefly in Lili Boulanger's life because of World War I, since she won in 1913 this award after a very tough competition where you have to be locked in a castle to compose pieces and many hope and only one wins. Let less the first woman to be so in 1913, but the World War I started August 1914, so she returned in France. And then unfortunately she died in 1918 from a long disease at the age of 24. So these gardens represent the what people call impressionism, but I think Debussy would have preferred symbolism, where nature represents feelings, or is the expression reflective of feelings. And it must be said that most of northern France, where Paris is, has this most beautiful gray sky that comes from the channel weather system that gives the colors of nature this kind of soft palette, which was so obviously inspirational for the painters who called themselves Impressionists after they were mocked by so being called Le Figaro French newspaper reviewer, who in fact in French means amateur impressionist or fakers. And in fact they took it on them to be called so, as we know, for that artistic movement of the paintings. But in music it comes more directly in the same time period, on the turn of the 20th century, from the still lingering 19th century of mood, atmosphere, literature, and budding industrial revolution, but not yet fully in. And it has this kind of poetic movement that was started also by French poets called the symbolism. So trees represent life, and autumn would be old age, and spring, of course, birth and youth, and summer would be the exuberance of excitement. And I must say that therefore the meteorological situation of Paris in the northern part of France is in fact to be part of this splendid creative imagination of all French composers of that time period, because most of their titles are to do with outdoors. It's the rain, is the wind, is the garden, is the fountain, is the birds, is the sky, is the light, is the sunlight of the dawn, but also of the sunset, and all of these different atmospheres of daylight through the 24-hour cycle, or at least 12 of them. And then the four seasons with the empty trees without leaves, death, winter, and then the budding vegetation, reborn one more time again in the cycle of nature. And then of course the sight that's for youth of the sea and its waves and its apparently, in fact, continuous eternal movement shape, while stagnant on the outside but constantly moving inside and on the surface. Always renewed while always surprising. And I think that away from the formal music of a sonata form, even if sometimes they called some of their pieces sonatas, I mean, in the 20th century, all one movement tone poems could have been called sonatas. Would it be Scriabin, Berg, and of course Debussy, and even if they were in several movements, sonare, resonant. Well, I don't think it was for the form anymore. It was more about naming it. But I think the fascinating thing with the French music of that time period is that it's as written in detail as in the notation, as sounding improvised and inspirational and possibly sort of spontaneous. Not only the arpeggios that represent the wind and the drops of the rain, because that will be an easy, cheap trick. I mean, obviously effective, imitating the instrument that was reborn in Paris at that time, that was the harp from the antique days of thousands years earlier, with new technology, one chromatic, one with the pedals, for which Ravel wrote the Introduction and Allegro, and Debussy les danses exotiques, and one of each of the different model style types, and the introduction of new instruments, like Ravel introducing the saxophone in the orchestration of a symphony orchestra, even in his orchestration of Mussorgsky's pictures in the old castle. And generally depicting music from paintings into sounds through poetry, with art songs. It's so beautiful art songs like Debussy or Ravel or Fauré, or of course there are so many of these French composers of the beginning of the 20th century, or at the beginning of the 20th century, rather 19th century born composers, not all of them as famous as they should be, because sometimes a 3-minute, 6-minute song based on a poem is it's sort of like Horseman and the Horse, the poem and the song, the music, the word, the verb, the sound. This intimate connection in a way makes it difficult to be international, because you have to, of course, listen to the melody by itself, but the words and how they were set in the sounds that not always reflect them, sometimes contradict them and give distance with them. It's not just a program music. That's what I was saying. It's not just the harp for the arpeggio. And composers like Debussy used also this opportunity to break with the developmental thought process of a compositional, I would say, establishment, where you learn how to develop your thought to be sort of organized in a way that you're persuasive and intellectually. And this tradition, this paternalism of that 19th century was either followed in a very subtle way by a Ravel, who in fact didn't break it but transformed it with his finesse, un peu comme Mozart. Mozart didn't break Haydn, Beethoven did. Ravel didn't break Fauré, Debussy did, even if he didn't directly do so. But the point of the story is that there is a tradition, and there is a transmission, and then there is a transition, and then there is an evolution, and then there is a revolution. There are some who break to build what they have to express, because they cannot find the tools in what they receive for what they have to express, and they feel constrained. And then those who find that they just flow through and evolve without to have to revolutionize the language, the order of the notes, the organization of the harmonies. And then the fact that the music is to express, and what does music express but itself? just like the language expresses itself. I express myself, be it with a poor, unfortunately, vocabulary in English, but I want to reach you, so I speak to you in English. J'aurais bien voulu m'exprimer en français parce que j'ai un vocabulaire un petit peu plus développé et je peux penser des choses plus subtiles. I can say more subtle things in French because my vocabulary is a bit more developed. But it's like saying I prefer to express myself in the fortepiano Beethoven sonatas compared to, let's say, the Bach contrapoint on the harpsichord. And or Liszt's rubato on Chopin's rubato on one of these 19th century pianos, which are not yet our powerful ones, but still have that subtlety of the clarity of the sound and the straight strung combination of the different areas of the keyboard from the bottom to the top. In other words, it's all musical worlds, ecosystems, atmospheres. And we're in a way lucky today to have access to these various preceding ones. Sometimes we are puzzled in front of our present plethora of almost fragmented many style types of musical languages that are developed and expressed by composers of today. But at the same time, you can say that people were puzzled by Beethoven's late period when he was writing some dissonances that were probably also perhaps understood by few, but rejected by many, or basically misunderstood or not understood at all. And sometimes Ravel can be considered a traditionalist, and then Rachmaninoff, a 19th century composer within the 20th century, since he lived 40 years in the 20th century, completely aware that there were other who wrote musical idioms that changed the paradigm entirely. I mean, of course, atonalism, serialism. It's like in painting, cubism compared to figuralism. You don't figure anymore the paintings, you express the moods. You don't, for some, but others can still try to do it figuratively. It does not mean there's a rule that you should not be tonal or you should be atonal. All these kind of dictatorships of aesthetics are always short-lived. I mean, they are convictions, and then they are schools of thought, and then they are processes that fascinate musicologists who explain them and teachers who teach them. But all overall, for the very direct transmission between the performer and the audience is the music itself, and therefore that language that in the case of the art songs is connected to the very language, a lieder in German, a mélodie in French, and so on. When you play the music without lyrics, you can say in a way it's expressive of it even in absence of. And in the case of Debussy, who wrote, instead of the developmental and variation and thought process organized motivic development, which is taught in composition naturally, then as well, of course, he mostly uses this kind of echo cells and produces this effect of like the pointillistic painters do by dots and echo dots. And you look at it from close up, it looks more or less blurry. From far away it makes sense, but in fact it's up to the viewer to sort of focalize, and not rather the music itself telling you, therefore the painting, sorry, you see, I already compare them. The art form of the suggestion. I think that's what would be probably what Lili Boulanger, who was immersed in that time period, is a very obviously strikingly inspired, sensitive, and gifted child with an older sister, Nadia, 6 years older than her. We talk about Lili being 6-year-old in 1900, composing her first songs by the time she's 12 in the early 20th century. And Nadia Boulanger being her mentor in a way at home because of Lili's illness. She couldn't go to school. She was bedridden, but very courageous to study, learn, and to impress herself by these novelties, which at the time were the harp, Debussy, Péléas and Mélisande opera premiere, attending and following her parents' meetings with various composers, the Tchaikovsky visiting Paris, Gounod coming home to meet with Ernest, their father. All this early childhood, be it so, but very drivenly inspired and very deep, unlike what we consider childhood, but of course childhood has different levels of depth that we don't always explore, know, or understand. But in the case of Lili, she was precocious in many ways because her music so shows that in the terms of the depth of the inspiration. She wrote a song when she was not even a teenager, a melody art song, on a poem which talks about a mother visiting the grave of her daughter. So it's difficult to speak about it other than hear it. But in the case of the two gardens that I would like to present for you, she composed them in 1913, 1914, when she won the Rome Prize, so she was in her early 20s. So, and if I play for you the opening, you would say, oh, that sounds like Debussy, just because he's the most famous. But everybody who wrote music around that time in aspects could sound like Debussy. Not that it belittles Debussy, it just places it in its own context, time-wise. It's like a historian learning, studying the transitional periods, and this certainly is one where the music expresses through echo cells, through mood settings, through interruptions, through fragmentation, the way you feel when you see a beautiful landscape, a beautiful person, or a gaze, anything that cannot be defined, like the soul, the placement of the atmosphere of sadness compared to melancholy. Like Victor Hugo used to say that melancholy is the happiness of the sad people. Many poets and writers were also trying to define these different shades of moods between not happiness and sadness, but within sadness, with the happiness as well. So this kind of nuancing of the moods is very clear in the expressive sort of painted touch, poetically played, which I think combines in a way in an organ harp, the organ being the pedal, and the harp being the arpeggiation, and then the harmonic major, minor, or modulations that bring the sense of shiver or warm or cold. I mean, all of these modulations are not here to be only tonal or evolving the tonal, regardless how you want to define them, because you could say it's alteration, it's evolution, it's revolution, is breaking, is continuing. Whichever way you feel that the atmosphere is constructed by the harmonies, it's all about the mood setting. The silence following is also filled with her sounds, like a parfum that remains in the air. All of these little innuendos, all of these impatiences and these delays and these hopes and this storytelling interrupted by a mood moment like, oh, I saw this, or oh, I felt that, or oh, the shiver of the tree, or the wind, or the bird. And these interruptions are like what, in a modern way for the time, instead of developing the thought process in musical motivic learning, as I said earlier, it was more about translating in music the way one feels when one is alive, is spontaneously, so to say, and the inner life, and how we perceive differently the different sensations of the of course, mostly the weather-related. Again, I speak about the weather-related French music of the time because I think summertime specifically so. The gardens, therefore, were the time to live outside, to eat picnic outside, to breathe outside, to observe the river, the birds, the nature, to be in the nature, to become part of the nature. Most of the time in Paris, winter time is very humid, cold. People don't know and don't have enough isolation in their construction, so basically everybody is cold and humid, and articulations hurt, and everybody lives a little bit more like a mole. As soon as May to September comes, everything is live. We open the windows and we live, as we would say, instead of protecting from the conditions in the fall and winter time. And even that, I think, is part of the, not all, but part of the explanation. Of course, it's imaginary gardens, so it doesn't have to be a specific Gargenville garden of her childhood near Paris in their summer home, or the one at the Villa Medici where she composed this, which are incredible gardens in size compared to the little garden in her house. And regardless which garden, it's anybody's inner garden, in fact. That's what I think and I feel, and I think everybody who hears it starts daydreaming about something, whatever it is on their own. That's the greatness perhaps of the music without lyrics, because then it disconnects you from the obligation to only see how they colorize in music, or they characterize in music the words by the given composer from the given poet, and this combination of the two is fascinating, as I said, in the art songs, but here it's missing since there is no words, but therefore we can imagine a lot of things by ourselves, regardless if we know the piece, or we hear the piece, or we play the piece, because it's almost revealing itself differently every time you play it. It's not so of course, it's notated with bar lines and everything, but it's not other than a juxtaposition of fragmented moments of emotion. Would it be from the outside in, because of the situation of being in the open air and the garden and all what the symbolism of the hot, cold wind, the rain, the drops, the sunset, the sunrise, the flowers, the garden, the birds, the fishes, the pond, or the inner world of what this atmosphere brings to us, perhaps a sense of calm or a sense of appeasement or a sense of anxiety or the reflection of ourselves in the pond with the sky could mean that we are also reflecting on ourselves. There's so many levels where the impressionism, the symbolism in which these people of that time were immersed by choice or by obligation. Some try to escape it with atonalism, some remain more tonal, and some just paint sort of like tone paint. The expression of the moods that the poets write with words, or the novelists with storytellings as well, words, and then operas, and then films, and then any form of imagination that connects us to our inner humanity, as well as the experience of being human, is a French expression, chose vue, things that are seen. And those things that are seen are reflected, filtered by our psyche differently, because we all are different. And we see same things, but we don't react the same way. Some people can cry at the sunset. Sorry. Some people can find it only a not meteorological, a celestial factor, which it is. Some people can find in the waves of the ocean and the high tide and the low tide the cycles of life. I mean, everything can be seen in everything symbolically, and that's fine. It doesn't have to be defined, but all of these different elements express themselves within, they express themselves, I mean, in the piece, like in this opening, which seems to be in C-sharp minor, telling a sad story, and then all of a sudden we have a C major dominant, as if interrupting, and then back to the story. And the end of the first sentence in F major. So we have like one mood, a surprise, continuation of the mood with the storytelling, and again a surprise. Why not? And then stay in C-sharp minor. That would be. But starting C-sharp minor, and then, why not in C major then? So this fragmentation, but then written phrase-wise, legato, connected, directed, the harmonic surprise is not just a surprise, well, it is, but it creates this sense, again, I think, of cold and warm, or something very emotional, very epidermic, very, very immediate, not only intellectual, I think. At least I feel it like that. And all of a sudden, you have a continuum which endlessly drops to the surprising C major, when it still develops in now major of C-sharp minor in D-flat major, but not, which we had in the second bar. So if I surprisingly cut, just for the purpose of demonstrating, the C major, F major bars, and only keep the C-sharp minor, D-flat major in harmonically same mood, of atmosphere into around C-sharp minor or D-flat major. And if I have the interruption modes, this C major, I have something luminous, because that's what I think the C major and G major and F major triad sound. So it's not bitonal, it's not perhaps alternating tonal. I think it's just what it is. But she wrote, it doesn't have to be explained, but it could be, not to be meant, but to taste it and then accept it, and taste the bitter and sweet together in the same bite of the C-sharp minor and the C major. Perhaps sadness and happiness, hope and excitement, perhaps even anticipation. Then is this drop of chords, C-sharp minor or D-flat minor, G minor, C-sharp minor. Drastic changes of moods is like sunshine, gray sky, and then rain. Or perhaps hope, despair, and surprise. And then the storytelling continues, which started but was interrupted, which tried to rise in major. And this time it goes 4 bars, which is the longest we had without interruption. And of course, as soon as it reaches what is supposed to be its arrival point or its blossoming moment, we land on the unexpected F major chord, just like in the 3rd and 4th bar when we did. So, and just like Debussy, Écossel, immediately say it again. I think it's a term of endearment. I love you so. I love you so. You want to say it, you interrupt it, but you don't make it into a statement with an eloquent rhetoric. It's more about on the moment, on the spur of the moment. You're interrupted, and you say it. And then you restart the storytelling in the melody. Arrival, but instead of in minor, in piano, it's forte and displayed. So the pedal is the organ and the arpeggios is the harp. And then you start back, or you go back to the continuation of the interrupted, so to say, storytelling with the Écossel. Chords, B flat, F flat minor, A major, just like we had in the first page. This is the section. These dropping steps of thirds of chords that have each a different atmosphere, suggestive of perhaps different range of flowers, or perhaps in the garden a step and you see another light or something appears to be always. You're sensitive to everything in the garden, the sounds, the smells, the vision, the reaction, the reflection, everything. And so in a way you're interrupted in your thought process of the storytelling because of what you see, in a way. And the storytelling has to still continue since the beginning. I remember next to each other, we have a lot of storytelling. I want to tell you. And the third page and last page returns to the mood of the opening, but this time this darker, deeper harmonization, but still in C sharp minor. With the interruption of the dominant of C major. Dominant of D major, and then dropping chords. But spread in the disposition compared to the opening where we had and the very simple opening, which was a string quartet writing. Here it's orchestral. It's a recapitulation, but orchestrated and enriched by all the mood captured from the middle page. And in a way, the recapitulation of this short piece is not a recapitulation, it's a summarization, I would say, of all things felt, touched, heard, intensely filtered by the psyche of the person who is storytelling, by telling to a friend, oh, you know, this garden has such a beautiful reflection and flowers and vegetation, and not to mention animals and the birds and the this and the that and the noises and the smells. I mean, all the senses are alive. And it ends with the last arpeggio with the augmented fifth, which we also attribute to the parallel chords of Debussy's full tone scale. But here it's used more as a major with a minor sixth instead of major, minor. We have a midway. So it's not fully sad, it's not fully happy, it's probably melancholic in that sense of bittersweetness of situations between your moods, what you receive from the atmosphere, and how you translate that in your storytelling. And within few seconds you have created in music a poetry of words, a painting of sounds, and a depiction of all the senses that participate through the expression of few harmonic progressions, few melodic lines, and pedal resonating, like for the harp on the organ, and the harp intimate sound, as well as the organ holding resonances on the pedal piano, which allows through the pedal meaning of the piano to do that. So I think in many aspects one can say, oh, well, I like this, but it reminds me of this. Yeah, that's true. But everybody reminds you of somebody else. In this case, it's not just because, and it could have been composed 30 years later, just because the person would be equally emotioned by the beauty of this place, and why not translate it the same way? After all, the eternity of the thoughts comes from the fact that we are experiencing our human condition, finitude, hope, love, life, and death all in one. And not in all in one, but I mean all these, well, in a way, but meaning we're all animated by this kind of, our psyche is attuned to all this. And so we translate it with different, perhaps, stylistic situations. Of course, they're different from the Middle Age to the Renaissance, to the, let's say, Baroque, to the Classic, to the early Romantic, to the modern, and perhaps to the postmodern, to the point of the contemporary now. Of course, we can do that, and that is very teacherish to slice by time periods, because some of the composers, poets, writers, painters either look back, either look forward, either don't correspond to their time period that we want to define as if they all knew that they follow. Of course they didn't, but it's just to say scholastically we try to organize them so we can learn them. True, because we have access to all of them more than before, so we have to put some order into it. And chronological is as good as in any other one. But we notice very quickly that not all of them fit in the box, obviously. Tchaikovsky, Brahms, and Rachmaninoff don't sound as modern as a Debussy and a Bartók and a Stravinsky within that turn of the 20th century, give or take. And of course then the explorations outside of the of tonality, and serialism, and semitone, quarter tone, and microtone, and the computer music, etc. All these are evolutions in one way or the other, or revolutions when you look forward, or meaning backwards, but evolutions when you look forward. And because we play music frozen in its time, but it's today, it's present, even if it's the present of 1914 in this case, in 2018. What do I know? I don't really know much of the lifestyle time of the time when it was composed. I don't have to, in a way. I just have it's like a perfume. It's the extract of it that matters. And I smell it, and I immediately, through the smell of a parfum, I already imagine I'm in this place, or I'm in that place, or I am in this other world, or in my dream world, or in my hope world, and all that. D'un Jardin Clair is the clear garden, something to do with the sky, is the second of the two gardens of Lili Boulanger. The first was the sad garden. I think she calls it the old garden, Vieux Jardin. I called it un jardin triste. I think she combines the two. And in the Jardin Clair, which is the clear garden in terms of light, skylight, I think she also combines it symbolically with happiness and excitement, and in a way, almost a waltz feeling. I will play it for you first. Even if it's a happier one compared to the, to me at least, of course, since I am the one who presents, I'll tell you how I feel it, and you might disagree, to the older garden, mainly C-sharp minorish, with this interaction with interruptions of luminous F or C major or G major, and then inside the moods of the lingering, of the wandering, of the yearning. Whenever here, I think it's more brilliantly, clearly, as she likes it, Clair, and more frankly, so B major. So 4 bars of a waltz, wow, in a row, no interruption, and immediately more of an echo cell to the original cell, and an echo of the echo cell interrupted by some kind of I spoke almost in French, as if exhaling with this quick accumulation of mood changes, because you have a harmony each quarter note. When you had one harmony in the rhythm of the harmony, a bar, tonic, dominant, tonic, well, with an added 6 but still dominant after, then subdominant, and then dominant, with the echo of the echo again. So you sort of, she brings us to hope, imagine, or settle into something more expected. So you could continue. Sorry, Lili. Just for the example, what you could have done if you wanted to continue. Etc., etc. She didn't. And she, even if she, compared to the earlier garden, where the fragmentation was almost constant, here there is a flow and then an interruption, a flow and an interruption, but the flow is longer. And this dominant tonic in the left hand, almost like a resonant pizzicato or harp, represents the idea of the dance, of the waltz, with a tonalization that clearly establishes it in B major. It takes the whole sonata by Berg to realize it ends in B minor, because it's so moving constantly in this frantic search for what it is that we're searching for, compared to here where we're completely settled from the get-go. There is a little introduction that I'll replace after that, but just to contrast with the flow of chords, it's like all of a sudden so many flowers smell in us. 3 quarter notes, 3 chords. D major 6th chord, C major 6th chord, B flat major 6th chord. It's not the 6th chord because obviously they're not tonally organized to be resolved in their tonic or whatever on their root positioning. They're just like the brush of the painter that gives us a few colors that just are suggestive of a changing mood, in this case, quick changing mood. In these 2 bars of 3/4, she uses the 3/4 notes tied to quarter note, half note. If you look at it as a 2-bar group, it is a hemiola, and you hear it in 3/2. So everything is in 3/4 from the beginning of the waltz. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. The long, short, short, long. 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And now 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. She doesn't write hemiola, obviously, nor does she write rubato. She writes a tempo souple, which is beautifully contradictory, because if you say a tempo after the ritenuto is to be strictly in the beat, and at the same time supple, flexible. So if you're in tempo, you cannot be flexible. I think in a way it means rubato. Rubatro, not too much in French. Rubato, rubatro, or rubat too much. How much is too much? How much is not enough? But I think already the hemiola, after the established 3/4 by bar of 3/4 in a 1 bar of 2, 3/2, I'm sorry, suggests that larger brush compared to the lighter brush. It's always images of comparing to paintings. Continues in 3/4 in A major, apparently so, modulating into F sharp, but even so, this time the 2 bars of hemiola of chords that are half notes because they are tied over the beat, over the bar, tim tom tom ti. You feel like almost a hesitance in these harmonizations compared to the flow of the first. And this and goes back to the rhythm of the waltz. Even if a hint of the hemiola with C major, which of course is flat 2 dominant, but is not Neapolitan. Well, it should be. But it doesn't sound that at all. In other words, that is another thing which is very good with this kind of using of the harmonic language in a usage that does not involve tonal centers. It's all about using the chordal progressions and the apparent modulations or sudden escapes in a different tonality, more about mood setting. Oh, such a beautiful garden. Oh, this breeze. Such a garden is beautiful. Oh, what a nice sunset. Oh, the bird. Or something that interrupts, but you still continue to walk in the garden. So you are the storyteller by being who you are, but you see, smell, feel, hear things that are nature that you're part of. And you're even more sensitive to it, as again I like to think, is because they're always so secluded during the winter that they dream for this moment where they can become the vibrating membranes of nature themselves. And of course in symbolism translated in their feelings for each other, for the others, for the atmosphere of the day in terms of war, peace, industrialization, change of modernity, going into electricity from... I mean, all these things are part of their lives. Not that their music has to translate it in complete ways, but in some ways they're part of that. Not only in some ways, in every way they're part of that. And how their psyches of their 19th century born people deal with these tremendous changes, and how they either look back to reassure themselves to perhaps the wonders of nature compared to perhaps the monstrosities that humans do with nature. I mean, perhaps I'm pushing it farther in the philosophy than they had to think about it then, because after all, within the time period, they only thought as they did. I don't know how they did, and she never told me. But I start extrapolating, as many people do when they write a novel or even a historic novel. They feel like they re-enter in another time realm. But be it as it is. It's my moment to share with you the different expressions that I feel are hinted and innuendos of thoughts. And then she still goes back to the first section. It's really, in a way, very innovative in the broken, contrasting, fragmented, atmospheric kaleidoscope of sorts, or roller coaster of emotions, but it keeps that traditional ABA form where the A prime is in a way the summary of the first two, but in a different point of view, as if you went in the garden in the morning with the morning sunshine and the shadows on the trees is different than in the afternoon where there are, different lengths of shadows, and it seems to be the same path that you come back through from which you entered in the garden, but all of a sudden you hear it, see it, discover it, smell it with different aesthetic. Wet staccatos with pedal could be considered, and she writes fluid even on top of it for that, to indicate it for the interpretation, while she asks bien chanté, plus lent, well sung and slower the melody. Again, the narrative part I think, and then in the resonance you have those harp, perhaps they're drops, perhaps they're raindrops, perhaps they're, I don't know what they are, it doesn't matter really what they are to be named, but hear and then we feel, perhaps daydream and reality combined. So the alternation of the two, again back to the first. And the beauty of it is that I explain it with my way, but it's not the only way. Each person who will play it will receive it in a different way and will process it through their psyche their own way, through their sensitivity, through their capacity or the desire to analyze or to compare or to combine with other modes of expression, and perhaps connect it to painting or not, or connect it to something else. It doesn't have to be what I say, but I like to describe it because I am here and I'm sharing it with you. Feeling of being suspended at the end with these very long held notes. You can see it's endless ties, almost like an organ or a harp, again orchestrally or combined, that give you this residue resonance that is like the struck hammer on the string, and the vibration of the string is the resonance that we hear. Therefore, it's not the moment of the impact; it's so much the after impact of the resonance of the soul. I think, in my view, shaking to the mood. The last 6 bars, she places the lowest possible B, in this case, then the chord, played pianissimo, before the beat with a tied grace note, and then the octaves in the high register, probably like, I think, harmonics on the harp only can do this kind of magic sound. Pedal held, and then in the middle register, some kind of bell. She says, en dehors mais doux, which means brought out but tenderly. Perhaps it's a caress, perhaps it's a bell that sounds at the back of the gardens, if there's a church. It might be a miniature, and it is, in terms of the condensed density, or even it's just brevity. I mean, it is a very short piece, and the other one too. So if you're not attuned when you play them to anticipate all these fragmented changes of moods that you know will come, but you want to surprise your audience while you want to charm the audience as well, so they can enter with you in that garden that you already visited to learn the piece, obviously, as a performer, and they don't, because they come into it as spectators or listeners. Therefore, they have to be taught the storytelling, the mood setting, the atmosphere. And you want to share all that with them without all these words I used. And then you don't know how much of each innuendo detail touches them or means to them in the first hearing. Perhaps they need to hear it several times. Perhaps they need to say in the beginning, I don't like it, it's not worth it, it's not much, it's only few notes with some resonances. Or you can say, oh my God, this is so amazing because it's so much in so little, and at the same time it's so touching. I feel like when I play it, I enter in another world and I escape from my reality of the day, which day it is, in this case 2018. Perhaps she escaped from her own reality in 1914 as well. God forbids, with World War I, it's enough reality to imagine for a young and sensitive person as her. But even if you take out this, the circumstantial situations of the of placing it in its time period, it's timeless by itself. The work. It's beyond her, as Emilesson Boulanger would say. Nadia Boulanger, of course, in this case, since I never met Lili, for obvious reasons of time. But I still think that it is true when she used to say the composer left the piece for the performer and the listeners to marvel it and cherish it or discover it or perhaps reject it, love it, adopt it. In other words, they're in, it's like you watch the sun or the moon, you react to it by seeing it, and you make up what you think it is meaning to you. You inject some meaning to it, obviously. That is your human meaning, is not itself, it's celestial movements. But even so, just to say that even if you know that Lili Boulanger was a woman, first composer to win the Rome Prize, that she died young, that she was ill, fine, it's a truly tragic story by itself, sad, if not tragic, but it is. And then you say, oh, why didn't she live longer to write more? She would have written that sonata and this, who knows what. Perhaps. But even so, the drops we have of her, like of her gardens, are as valuable as grand works that last an hour long. I think she was a composer of her time, and lesser known because she didn't have time to develop an oeuvre that today would make her as important as a Debussy, who had the time to develop his, so to say, had the time, it's all relative. None of them died old in today's terms of life expectation, though. Nothing is guaranteed. Again, the finitude of human condition. Life, love, death, hope, and excitement and despair and mood, and just translating the human experience. But I think it is decontextualizing it meaningful as well, just by what it brings to the random performer who might look at it today and say, oh my God, what is this? Oh, so beautiful. Where does it go? All this. And each harmony brings another step of enmarvelment. And then, oh, it's a waltz. So you start dialoguing with the thought process of the composer to you while learning the learning process. Wrong notes, harmonies, misguessings because of the surprising harmonies, until you start knowing it enough to make it into your own language, so that when you perform it, the listener believes that it's your music literally and truthfully. You have to be believed. Doesn't know what you're playing says, but that sounds like Debussy, because they've heard mostly of this music style, type, atmosphere, because of that time period, style, type, atmosphere. You can say, yes, but it's Lili Boulanger. Not it's better, no, it's different, not it's only the same, because it's differently same, as we are all genetically differently same, or different and individual in our samenesses. I don't know if that exists as a word, but that's too much philosophy for my vocabulary to express. Lili Boulanger died on March 15, 1918. Claude Debussy died March 25, 1918. But in fact, they're timeless now. They're with us every day we want, everywhere we are. And Lili Boulanger and her two gardens certainly is. And I'm very honored to have been given a chance to share it with you.